Thank you, Ari, for enabling this conversation and so many others, and to each of you who are listening. That gives us the context to be able this morning, or in other time zones, different times, to spend time with Rabbi Jack Riemer. Rabbi Riemer is, for me, a role model and a beloved friend. What makes you a role model, Jack, is your continued enthusiasm for new ideas and your constant harvesting of what you read and hear and putting it into sermons. I will add that for many rabbis, as Ari mentioned, Rabbi Riemer's sermons have been preparation for our own congregational teaching. I probably quoted Rabbi Riemer more than any of my contemporaries because he every week would write at least one sermon that would get distributed to friends and colleagues. And so that's the context. I will add one more piece, and that is Rabbi Riemer and I worked together on a book that will be coming out in September with Ben Yehuda Press called Duets on Psalms, Drawing Meaning from Ancient Words. When I speak with my friend, Rabbi Riemer, one of the things that impresses me is how enthusiastic you are, Jack, at the age of 94, for what you just learned. But where I want to begin our conversation today is with acknowledging a loss that's a personal loss for you, and that's the passing of Rabbi Harold Kushner. Rabbi Riemer and Rabbi Kushner would speak every Friday for many years. They would be chavruta, study partners, to prepare for high holiday sermons together for many years. And I know that Rabbi Kushner's daughter already a week ago asked that you might consider to prepare a eulogy for your beloved chavruta, for your friend, Rabbi Kushner. So as the funeral for Rabbi Kushner is tomorrow, and we're, as a larger community, appreciating his importance in our spiritual lives, I would open with you sharing with us what and who Rabbi Kushner was to you.
Thank you. Before I begin, did you hear that introduction? Were you impressed as I was with all the compliments that Ari gave me? I must have only one quality you left out. You forgot to mention my modesty. Modesty. I have more modesty in my finger than most people have in their whole bodies. But other than that, you covered everything that I would have covered if I were introducing me. So I want to thank you. But you're right. Today is a sad day. Not only for me, not only for his family, but for the world, without exaggeration. Harold Kushner did more than anybody else I know to bring a vital and vibrant and sensible understanding of God to people all around the world. It's interesting, on this day before his funeral, people are writing in, rabbis are writing in to express their feelings about him. So far, I've read about 30, 40, not one has talked about his philosophy. Not one has talked about his theology. Every single tribute says the same thing. He was such a mensch. He was so good to me. He treated me as if I was his equal. He came to my shul when I was just starting out, and he spoke about me and to me with so much respect. We went to lunch together and he paid for it. And comments like that. Harold Kushner's to be remembered not only for his theology, not only for his psychology, to be remembered for being a consummate mensch. And the world is much poorer today without him. That's the first thing I want to say. What else should I say about him? It was hard to write a eulogy. Where do you begin? I didn't know if I belonged among the comforters or if I belonged among those who needed comfort. So, because I know whenever I had a problem, whenever I didn't know what to do, I would go to him. And so that's what I did today. I went to the writings of Harold Kushner, to the memories of Harold Kushner, and I asked myself, what would he say? What would he say if he could speak to us today? And I think I came up with three things. One he would never say because he was much too modest a person. But the most remarkable thing about Harold Kushner was that neither great tragedy nor great success spoiled him. You and I know many people who used to be nice people, and then tragedy came upon them with no notice, for no reason, and it broke their spirits and crushed them. And you can't blame them. And you and I know some people who were nice people until tremendous success came upon them. And when it did, it made them vain and arrogant and unfit to live with. And you can't judge them for that. The wonder of Harold Kushner was that neither great success nor great tragedy spoiled him. When he received this terrible, terrible blow, his son, born with a strange disease that caused premature aging, his son who at 14 had the mind of a 7-year-old, this boy who was so kind and so smart and so bright, dying before his eyes. That would have been enough to warp any one of us, but it didn't warp him. He determined that his son's life would not be in vain. And so he told the story of that life. And he learned lessons from that life. And he went around the country talking, but even more than talking, listening to people who faced problems like his. He listened, he held their hands, and he gave them comfort. And then he became successful beyond anybody's imagination. The title of his book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, became a part of the English language. And his book was on the bestseller list of the year for 2 years. And his book was translated into languages all around the world. And people in Asia and Africa and Europe studied his book. And that would have been enough to spoil many of us and make us unfit to live with. But just as tragedy didn't spoil him, success didn't spoil him. And the second thing I would say in his name, and that I think he would say if he could speak to us today, is that he understood that the goal of life is not my happiness. That's a byproduct. The goal of life is to help other people. And if you help other people, while you're busy doing that, happiness slips in through the back door without you even being aware of it. And therefore, I think he would say to the people who are grieving his loss today, to his daughter, to his grandchildren who brought him so much nachas, and to all the people whom he helped, don't focus on my going today. Focus on what you can do to help other people who need you. And if I may, one more story I'd like to tell about Harold. I was part of the original committee that was supposed to write a commentary on the Torah, the one that's now on every conservative shul. And we floundered, we just couldn't do it. And whatever we turned out was pointless, lifeless, and boring. We turned to Harold, we said, would you do it? And he accepted the assignment without question. And he devoted the last years of his life to writing a commentary that would bring together the wisdom of the sages of the last 2,000 years and enable it to speak to a new generation. And there was another well-known writer who was asked to be the editor of this book. And this editor said to Harold the day they signed the contract, you know, working on this project is going to cost us the time and the energy that we could have spent in writing one more book. And Harold said, so? So what? Harold said, I wouldn't care if all my books were forgotten. I wouldn't care if I never wrote another book, as long as the words of the sages spoke to a new generation. And so in his memory, the one thing I want to tell you tonight is one of the midrashim that he included in the book. It describes Moses, and I think it describes Harold. The midrash, Harold loved midrash. The midrash that Harold quotes near the end of the book says that when it came time for Moses to die, God said to the angel of death, you stand aside. Let me gather the soul of Moses. And the soul of Moses said, I don't want to go. I want to stay here because I didn't want to go down. Now that I'm down, I don't want to go up. I don't know any other place in the world as holy and as special as the body of Moses is. And God persuaded the soul of Moses to come up with 6 words. God said to him, Amalta harbe, Yagata harbe, Bola Noach. You have worked hard. You've accomplished much. Come and rest. And so the soul left the body of Moses and joined God in heaven. I think those words which Harold quotes near the end of this book, his last book, describe Harold as well. I think we can say of him, Amalta harbe, Yagata harbe, Bola Noach. Harold worked very hard, and Harold achieved very much, not only by his example, but by his words. Come and rest. The time has come for Harold to rest. And for those who loved him and learned from him and grieved for him, it's time for us to let him go, hard as that is, and to promise that just as he kept alive the memory of his son Aaron, we will strive to keep alive the wisdom that he taught us by his words and by his example. That's what I want to say today in memory of my friend.
Well, thank you, Jack. Thank you, Rabbi Riemer. I know that you wrote a eulogy, as I noted, requested by the family, that will be read tomorrow at the funeral, and that what you just shared presents some of that, but does it in a way that is you're honoring your beloved friend for us. So I thank you. In preparing for this moment, we've had some conversation, and part of what you wanted to share is, as a rabbi who finished the seminary in 1950, how
1954.
In 1954, and being at the seminary in the early 50s, how the Jewish world was different then than it is now. But before, and that's where we're going in a moment, what brought you, tell us a little bit on one foot, as we would say, in terms of the early part of your life and what motivated you to go to study to become a rabbi at the Jewish Theological Seminary?
It's not an easy question to answer. I've had a long life, a good life, and I delight in this chance to look back on it. But let me begin by saying that the years in which I went to high school and college, 3 revolutions took place in Jewish life. Each of these revolutions was big enough, important enough by itself to transform the Jewish people. To have all 3 take place at almost the same time was to shake the foundations of Jewish life completely. What were these 3 revolutions? The first, chronologically, was what we now call the Holocaust or the Shoah. We didn't have that word in. In 1945, 1939 to 45, European Jewry, which was the spiritual and intellectual and numerical center of the Jewish world, was murdered. Murdered by that country which was the capital of sophisticated wisdom and philosophy and art and science, Germany. We didn't really sink in what had happened at first. We didn't have the word Holocaust. No, but we didn't have Elie Wiesel yet. We didn't know what to make of this catastrophe. And they didn't know, nobody knew what to make of this catastrophe. Those survivors, we didn't have that word yet, who came to Israel, kept quiet. They didn't say much because the Israelis didn't understand them. Israelis would say, why didn't you fight back? As if they could, as if they were not emaciated near starvation, as if they had weapons, which they didn't, as if the fences around them that they might have used to get out were not electrified, and anybody who tried to go over them died on the spot, as if they had allies among the Poles and the Germans and among the Ukrainians that would have helped them. The Israelis didn't understand. Why didn't you fight back? And so they didn't answer, they kept quiet. And the survivors that came to America didn't really become Americans. They lived in isolated corners of the land by themselves. They might live in Brooklyn, but they called themselves Belzers or Hasidei Siget or Hasidei Riminov or Hasidei Lubavitch, as if they still lived in those countries, cities where they had their origin. And they pulled down the windows and didn't let the culture come in, and they didn't go out. With one exception, Chabad. When Lubavitcher Rebbe came to America, he was the only one who wasn't satisfied with living in isolation and in privacy. He had a vision of going out into the world. And so the first two people he sent were Zalman Schechter Shlomi and Shlomo Karbach. And they went around from one campus to another, singing, telling stories, and awakening interest in Hasidism and the Judaism. And by the time the Rebbe was finished, he had created what he called shluchim, messengers, agents, on every single campus in America and in every country overseas. Amazing, amazing achievement. It came, when Lubavitch Rebbe died, he had several thousand of these agents teaching and living and loving and inspiring others to love Judaism all over the world. If you went to Kathmandu to climb the mountain and you vaguely had an idea that it was Pesach, at the foot of the mountain, there was a Chabad house where you could find a Seder. And that happened all around the world. That was the first traumatic revolution that occurred in Jewish life, the destruction of European Jewry. The second was the creation of the State of Israel. For the first time in 2,000 years, the Jews had sovereignty, which meant they had their own army, it means they had their own language, it means they had their own schools, it means they had their own minorities to deal with. It meant that for the first time in 2,000 years, they had power and all the risks and all the dangers and all the corruptions that can come with power. And they had to deal with the question, what do we do now? How do we live a Jewish life in a whole new situation? And the third revolution, which took place after 1945 was the creation in America of the freest and the best educated, at least in secular terms, of any Jewish community in centuries. Jews joined the army in the Second World War and met non-Jews for the first time in large numbers, met them as buddies and as partners. And they came back from the war and they went to college under the GI Bill of Rights. And they became lawyers and doctors and accountants, things they had never been before. Not on the East Side when they first arrived. Now they became professionals. And the third thing they did is they created Suburbia. They left the city and created new homes they created new suburbs all around every city in America. And when they did that, the synagogue that fit best in Suburbia was the conservative synagogue, because Reform was considered too assimilationist, not passionate enough, not caring enough about the Jewish people in Israel. And the Orthodox were considered too limited and too unwilling to go into the suburbs. And so conservative Judaism came to being in the suburbs. So these are the three transformations of Jewish life: the crushing of European Jewry, the rise of an independent state of Israel, and the creation of the freest. You ever been in a community as free as the Jews of America were, and the most secularly educated of any community in many Jewish centuries? And I grew up in those years. I came from a traditional Jewish home where Judaism was taken very seriously and very personally. But we knew that the outside world wasn't very interested in Judaism. And many of my generation simply fell off. But when I went to college, I knew about the Holocaust and felt the Holocaust. In my family, my parents had lost their family, had lost precious people in the Holocaust. It had an effect. I remember how when the news came about the ones they lost, from then on, we didn't sing Zemiros at the table anymore on Shabbos. There was just no spirit with which to sing. And when the state of Israel came, our hearts were there. And our family did what it could, legally or illegally, didn't matter, to get weapons there, to get money there, and to express support for what was going on there. And we produced 3 children, 2 of whom became professional pharmacists, 1 of whom became a rabbi, and all of them took Judaism seriously. So to answer your question, how did I become a rabbi? I became a rabbi as a result of those 3 revolutions. The Holocaust made me ask myself, what's going to happen to this heritage? What responsibility do I have to make sure that it carries on? The state of Israel made me ask the question, who's going to care about their safety and their survival if I don't? And the rise of American Jewry made me realize that there was a whole new opportunity to create a different, vital, vibrant kind of Jewish life here in America. I think it was an inseparable combination of these 3 things. I think it was perhaps the state of Israel more than the other 2, but who can measure? It brought me to a conviction of concern and love and loyalty for the Jewish people. And that it was out of that motive that I came to the seminary. Does that answer your question?
It does, fully and beautifully. You had the privilege while you were a student in the early 50s at JTS to be the secretary for Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, Professor Heschel. How did that come about that you became his assistant? And the way you described at the beginning the nature and impact of Rabbi Kushner, what was the impact of Rabbi Heschel that you saw first on yourself and the larger Jewish world?
Okay. The custom at the seminary was that everybody got free tuition, free room, and free board, in exchange for which everybody was supposed to do 4 hours of volunteer work with a different professor. And I don't know how to explain it, thanks to my friend Sam Dresner. However, I was given the privilege of working for Dr. Heschel and helping him during those years when his first books came out. That was a great privilege. Seminary was divided into those who loved him and those who didn't. There were those who didn't considered him a relic of the old world, but those who appreciated him recognized him as a new voice in Jewish life and as somebody who was capable of carrying on the heritage and bringing it to a new generation. He had unbelievable eloquence. He could speak brilliantly and write brilliantly in Polish, in German, in Yiddish, and in English. He learned English on the way over to America by memorizing the Bible. And he began to write in incredibly beautiful English almost as soon as he arrived. The first book he wrote, and probably his most important book, was The Earth is the Lord's. It was originally written in Yiddish and then in English. It's a book that describes the inner life, the spiritual life of Eastern European Jewry. And his claim was that this was the spiritual climax of all Jewish history, and that they've left us a legacy that we must continue. I'll just tell you, one of my first experiences with Heschel was he gave that talk originally in Yiddish at the 25th anniversary of YIVA, which is the Jewish scientific organization. I don't know if they still do it, but YIVA in those days had a conference once a year. And the climax of the conference would be a big public session. I think it was held at Hunter College. And Heschel gave this talk on the Eastern European Jewry and on their inner life and on their values. And when he finished, nobody planned it. I don't think anybody planned it. But one person, then another, and then another, and then the whole tremendous audience, including secular Jews, rose up and recited the Kaddish together. That was Heschel's power, to kindle a light not only in the hearts of Eastern European Jews, but in the hearts of those American Jews who were open to listening to him. So the seminary in my time was divided between the pro and anti-Heschels. Wolf Kelman used to call us the Kawana Club, and he used to call them the Lackawanna Club. But those who had the privilege of studying with him were led into a whole world that seminary curriculum never covered. Seminary curriculum never covered questions that he dealt with in his class. Never heard of Kavana, which means inwardness, spirituality. Never heard of the question of which counts most, to pray every day or to pray with love. And dozens and dozens and dozens of other such questions that we only learn to understand and to struggle with and to live by thanks to Heschel. And Heschel went through stages. In the 50s, he was a lonely voice at the seminary. The other professors did not take him seriously. They were interested in scientific study of the Jewish past, and he was talking about the living Jewish future. And in the 60s, he wrote Men in Search of God. and God in Search of Men, The Earth is the Lord's, these powerful, eloquent books. I'll tell you just one story from that period. He was invited by coincidence, whatever, to speak both to the Reform rabbinate at their convention and at the Conservative rabbinate at their convention. One was in Estes Park, Colorado, and one was in Atlantic City, a week apart. And he wrote two speeches. To the Reform, who stressed theology and philosophy and neglected the Jewish law, he spoke about how you can't have a Jewish life without observance, that you can't have a serious Jewish life without a commitment day in and day out to Jewish observance. And then a week later, he spoke to the conservative movement, which does care about Jewish observance. And he spoke to them about Jewish observance as meaningless unless you have intention and spirituality. And I remember he got up at the first convention and he had both papers in his hands and a glimmer in his eye. And he turned to me as if to say, should I or shouldn't I? If he had switched the papers, he would have been cheered in both places. But he understood that a rabbi's task is not to tell people what they want to hear. A rabbi's task is to tell people what they need to hear. And so he told the Reform rabbis, Jewish life without observance is meaningless. And he told the conservative rabbis, Jewish observance without inwardness is also meaningless. And believe it or not, and this is hard to say today, he was booed and he was jeered in both places. Yeah, it's hard to believe today, but he was booed and jeered and made fun of in both places. But he taught me a lesson that day, which is the rabbi's task is not to tell people what they want to hear. Anybody can do that. You don't need a rabbi for that. A rabbi's task is to tell people what they need to hear. A rabbi's task is not to be popular, but to be truthful. And so if I had to say in one line what the Heschel taught me, I think it would be that. Does that answer your question, Elie?
So beautifully and distinctly. And we have the privilege of being with you now, harvesting 69 years that you have been in the rabbinate. And I will add, so I don't forget, in our Machzor, in the conservative movement, I believe there's a prayer that you and Rabbi Kushner wrote together that's been part of our liturgy. And that's one of the things you took from Rabbi Heschel and did in Chavruta with Rabbi Kushner is writing prayers, more than one. And your contribution is great. One of the things that's most memorable about Rabbi Heschel is an interview he did with Eternal Light toward the end of his life. And in that interview, he was asked, what would you want to say to the next generation? And so knowing this is my last question before some questions from the group that's listening, and then I'll have a closing question. As in your own harvest of the rabbinate and more, your own harvest of Jewish life, and you and Sue are great grandparents, what would you want to say to the young generation of American Jews about why Judaism should matter?
Wow, that's a very hard question to answer, it really is. Because on the one hand, every new generation has the right to be itself. That's one of the wonders of humanity. A tree grows a seed, you plant an oak tree, it'll come out an oak tree. You plant a palm tree, it'll grow up to be a palm tree. No oak, nobody ever planted a palm tree, a seed of a palm tree and ended up with an oak. It doesn't happen. But human beings are different. What makes birth so exciting is that you have no idea who this newborn will become. He's liable to become another Bach, another Einstein, another Beethoven, who can predict? No newborn child. You look at a newborn child and you're thrilled at its unpredictability. God knows who this child will become. So on the one hand, that's the wonder of birth, that life is unpredictable. But on the other hand, to be a Jew means to be the inheritor of a long, long legacy, and to be the predecessor of a long, long, holy future. Means to be a link in the chain. And it's more than a catastrophe. It's more than a calamity if the chain ends with us. To be a Jew is to a lot of things you don't wonder in the world of purposelessness. To be a Jew is not to have amnesia. To be a Jew is to know who you are, where you come from, and where you're going, and who you represent. That's what it means to be a Jew. Look at the last page of Man is Not Alone, or the last page of The Earth is the Lord's. And he talks about the future. He talks about our obligation to the future. And that's what I wish for my great-grandchild, who because of COVID, I haven't had the privilege of meeting until now. But I want him to be himself and to be unpredictable. And at the same time, I want him to be a link in the chain of the generations. And if that's a contradiction, no, so that's a contradiction. But that's what I want. Elie?
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to look here if Ari can also, if we have any questions that people have. I always like this to be expanded.
So yeah, there are a few questions I see, and people, please feel free to chat now. One is, I don't know if we said, where did Rabbi Riemer actually grow up? Like which part of the United States?
Pittsburgh.
Oh, I never would have guessed that one. Which part of Pittsburgh?
Squirrel Hill.
Okay. And next question, since you're known as the rabbi's rabbi, so people call you when they have questions. Your guy, who did you call when you had questions? Like a practical, how to run the shul, Debartora type question.
I think Harold Kushner more than anyone else.
What is your advice? People want to know when Rabbi Spitz would call you, or any rabbi would call you for advice, maybe on, you have to give so many Debartoras every Shabbos, and you're the master of Debartoras. What is your advice? What do you give the rabbis for their weekly Debartora? Do you tell them? How do you guide them?
Again, that's a hard question to answer. You look and you look again and you look again. And sometimes you see things that are right in front of your face that you never saw before and that nobody else ever saw before. And when you look at them with fresh eyes, and that's really a large part of living, to look at the world with fresh eyes, to overcome boredom, to overcome been there, done that. Sometimes you look at the world with fresh eyes, or you look at the Torah with fresh eyes, and you see things you've never seen before. And you're so excited that you can't wait to share them with somebody else. I hope that answers your question.
It does. So you talked about your love for Israel, and that maybe that of the three things you mentioned really pushed you the most to become a rabbi. What, Israel's always a challenging subject, and there's always a question as to what the rabbi's role is in the synagogue when talking about Israel. What advice do you give rabbis about talking, not talking, how to talk about Israel from the bima in the synagogue?
That's a new question, really. Up until now, we saw our job as supporting Israel. In the world of public opinion, that financially, whatever Israel did, that's what we were in favor of. Now, for the first time, Israel is in a radically new situation. I'm sure you know as well, Dad, you read the papers, you know what's going on? There's the most right-wing and the most ultra-Orthodox coalition governing Israel today in all its history. And one of the first things that it wants to do is weaken the judiciary. Judiciary is not perfect, but the judiciary is important. We in America have a system of checks and balances. Congress can pass a law, president can veto it. President can sign a law, and the Supreme Court can declare that law unconstitutional. So we have checks and balances between the three forces in government. In Israel, the government is both the executive and the parliament. The executive has a large say, has a majority in government. And now they want to take away the power of the judiciary. They want to say that by one vote, the parliament can declare what the judiciary says is unconstitutional, they can declare constitutional. And something is happening in Israel now that never happened before. Every Saturday night, in every major city, tens of thousands and maybe much, much, much more than that, Jews come out to protest against the weakening of the court system. And they come out carrying and even wearing Israeli flags. Because what they're saying is, we're not unpatriotic, we're not anti-government, we're anti this government, and we're anti this effort to weaken the judicial system. Because God forbid if it takes place, Israel will not be the Israel that we love and the Israel that we believe in. So in the name of a higher Israel, they're not anti-Israel, in the name of a higher Israel, they're marching by every week. And the government couldn't ignore it. Government you can't not pay attention to this size protest. And Netanyahu's already said, okay. Let's postpone the discussion for 2 months. And let's see if during these 2 months we can work out some kind of a compromise. And let's see if we can make a change in the judiciary without making the change that we originally wanted to make. And nobody knows what will happen in these next 2 months, but all the parties and all sides are turning to American Jewry and saying, help our side. And for the first time, American Jews have the dilemma. We can no longer say whatever Israel does is right. We have to take a stand, one side or the other. And if we take a stand on one side, how do we relate to the other? The word compromise has become a weak word in Israel. Sissies compromise. Strong men win. And I think our job as American Jews is to teach both sides the holiness of the concept of compromise. You read the Talmud, it's made up of he said, but he said, he said, but he said. He said, but he said what he said first, and then he said his own opinion. The Talmud is a book of compromises. And I think that the task of American Jewry is to tell Israel, this is a time for both sides to compromise. And the compromise is not a sign of weakness. Compromise is a Jewish way of reasoning. Compromise is the Jewish way of reasoning. It's what made Hillel and Shammai able to live together. Hillel and Shammai married one family into the other. They ate together. They cared about each other because even though they disagreed respectfully, and they strove to find compromise. Hillel cited the arguments of Shammai first and then his own. It's the children of Hillel, the disciples of Shammai, who were more extreme than their founders. That's the way it always is in life. The disciples are more extreme than the founders. But we live at a time like we've never had before. I am worried, God forbid, God forbid, God forbid, that this disagreement can split Israel apart. We have enough enemies around us. We have to fight with each other. I am terribly worried about that danger. And I pray, and whatever I can do, that Israel learn the sacred art of compromise. That's what it is. And I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Alan Cohen wants us to just get some thoughts from you about your book for those who haven't read it, Finding God in Unexpected Places. Can you give us some highlights of that book and why you wrote it and what's in there that we should take away from it?
Oh, you're so nice. That's like a plug. You're tempting me to make. I'll just tell you one story from the book. First of all, I love stories. And I believe that God must love stories too. Otherwise, why would he have made the world? Was he short of aggravation? No world. If there were no world, there'd be no stories. And if there were no stories, how dull and boring God's life would be. This is one story from the book of many. It's a two-part story. See if I remember it. A family in Los Angeles had a menorah, and they would take it out every year and light it on Hanukkah. And one year they went to light it, no menorah. Searched the house, no menorah. Seems the cleaning woman had somehow thrown it out. They ran to the garbage wastebasket. It was picked up already. They called the wastebasket collection. Where did the garbage from such and such a stop go that was picked up in such and such a day go? One guy said, I don't know. Another guy, finally they found that guy in the garbage office whose name was Levy, I think, and he told them where it was. And this man jumped into the car with his family in his business suit and drove to that garbage dump. And he dug and dug and dug and dug, dug and dug. He found the menorah. He found his menorah. And the papers heard about it and they came out to interview him. And he said to them, it was a miracle. Can you imagine? I found a menorah. It was a miracle. Well, now he's getting into my area. I don't know what kind of a salesman he was, but I don't know if he's an expert in miracles. And I thought about that story, and I read there was a miracle. But you know what the miracle was? The miracle was that this menorah was a couple hundred years old, and that in every single generation, for 200, 300, maybe 400 years, this family had lit that menorah. What if for one generation they had quit? What if they had thrown it away? There would be no holiday for that family. And that family would soon no longer be Jewish. And it would be over. If the Jewish people had given up Hanukkah, it would have been over. Somebody once said to me, if the Jews hadn't celebrated Hanukkah, there would be no Judaism. If there's no Judaism, there'd be no Christianity, there'd be no Islam. The whole world was changed by the Battle of the Maccabees. But the miracle for me is not they found the menorah in the garbage dump. That's impressive. The real miracle is that for several hundred years, this family kept Hanukkah and lit this menorah. And God is found in strange places. My other book is titled The Day I Met Father Isaac in the Parking Lot. And make a plug for both those books if you want to find out what I found out when I bumped into Father Isaac in the parking lot. Does that answer your question?
Yes, indeed. So we have just a few more items to get to. We can't get to every question, but one question, I think you are still writing a weekly Debartora, is that correct?
When I can.
And so is that available? Like, I won't tell no one online here, the few hundred people here won't tell, but how do all of us get to read that? Is that possible for us to read that weekly Debartora? Or does it only go to like Rabbi Spitz and a few people on your mailing list?
I usually tell it to my family around the Shabbos table. That's what I do with it nowadays. I haven't sent it out to others very often. Sometimes I do. I'm not a very organized person, and I certainly don't know much about how to use a computer. I really don't. So I don't send it out like I used to. Occasionally I send it to somebody who sends it to somebody who sends it to somebody. It started during the COVID. I used to be able to go to shul and see people and say good Shabbos. In the time of the COVID, you couldn't go to shul. And even if you went to shul, there was no kiddush. So you couldn't schmooze with people. So I began the custom of sending Erev Shabbos a good Shabbos note to people, just to wish them a good Shabbos and a good week. And then I went from that to sharing a Debartora with them for that Shabbos. And then I found out, I didn't plan it this way, some of these people sent their my good Shabbos wish and my Debartora to other people. And pretty soon there was a whole big list of people who wrote to me and said, can I be on your list? And so I guess it goes to a lot of people now, but it started out as just a way of saying good Shabbos, because I miss not going to shul, don't you? And the COVID did a real job on us, terrible job. It isolated us. And the whole idea of Judaism is to be together. We don't have an I thou religion, we have a we thou religion. And to not be able to see each other, to have to wear masks, that's the opposite of Judaism. Seriously, I'm not exaggerating. We have to see. I walked down the street one day and a woman said hello to me and I have no idea who she is, because she was wearing a hat with the brim down. She's wearing a mask with up, and in between there was nobody I could recognize. That's not the way we're supposed to live. We're supposed to be able to not only see each other's faces, we're supposed to be able to see inside each other. The word panim, which means faces, also means inside. Everybody has an outside face and an inside face. Everybody walks around with secrets inside them. And the goal of human life is to know each other, to care about each other, and to pay attention to each other, and to all those things. So you got to know each other, and you can't live with masks, and you can't live in isolation. Custom has grown up in Debartora now, a wonderful custom. There are people that are living alone, and nobody calls, and nobody comes to the door. People are afraid to visit them. They might catch something, they might bring something. I mean, now you got funerals with only 10 people allowed, and the rest of the people watch online. Now you got shiva calls online. We never had that before. So Debartora organized, they were going to call the old people in the congregation and wish them a good Shabbos, so they wouldn't feel isolated. I heard about it. I said, that's a good idea. I'm going to volunteer for that. So I called, and the lady didn't know what to tell me. She hemmed and nodded, said, you're on the list to be called. I didn't realize that I was that old. But here I was getting a call, and they tell me that I'm on the list to be called. But all of us are on the list to call, and all of us should be on the list to be called. You want a mitzvah? I can't think of a more important, I'm not joking, I can't think of a more important mitzvah right now than to call isolated, abandoned, forgotten people and say, how are you? And is there anything I can do for you? And I'm going to the store, can I pick up anything for you? And I care about you. That's a mitzvah that we have to make mitzvah number one today. I'm not exaggerating. That's mitzvah number one in this crazy time in which we live. And when, God willing, this COVID is finally over, really over, we have to continue that mitzvah. Because there are always old people and always abandoned and forgotten people. There are always people who can't go to shul. And when that happens, we've got to pay attention to them. Shall I tell you an last story? I went to shul last Shabbos. I hadn't gone to Debartora a long time. And I went to hear Rabbi Steinhardt speak about his trip to San Diego to be with the immigrants. And I didn't wear a mask. And I came home with a terrible virus. And I spent the last 5 days of Pesach in the hospital. And let me tell you, there's no fun to spend Pesach in the hospital. They give you food. It's not home. It's not home. One nurse in the hospital used to give me a sleeping pill every night and then come every 2 hours and wake me up to take my vitals. Why put me to sleep? If you're going to wake me up, I don't know. But that's it's no fun being in the hospital on Pesach. I'd never been in the hospital Pesach in my life. But I learned from that some lessons. And one of these lessons is we got to learn to care about each other and be with each other and not only talk to each other, but hear each other. Anybody can talk to somebody else. That's not chachma. You have to hear each other, listen to each other. The guy once said to me at a kiddush, "How are you?" And I was about to tell him, and he turned around and talked to somebody else. He didn't want to know how I was. He just was pro forma asking. He didn't mean it. And that's not the way to live. The lesson of COVID ought to be to hear each other as well as to talk to each other. And that when we say to each other, "How are you?" to mean it. When we ask somebody a question, "How are you?" to mean it. And to listen to the answer. And to pay attention to the answer. Because even if I'm not a doctor, even if there's nothing else we can do for somebody, we can hear them, we can put our arms around them, we can say, "I care about you." We can say, "I don't laugh at this expression, I know your pain, I feel your pain." And that's mitzvah number 1 after COVID. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. We're in a little bit of overtime. I'm not an expert in soccer, but sometimes there's overtime. And since we have you, can I keep you overtime just for a few more minutes? Is that okay?
Sure.
Because someone we may score a goal here and win this game. Mortality. We started with Harold Kushner eulogy. You just mentioned you being in the hospital with pneumonia over Pesach. You're a rabbi. My wife is clergy. We had so many losses in our community in the last month. It's I don't even know what's going on. Can you share with us your thoughts on mortality? Does it keep you up at night? What can you share with us, given all your years of experience as a rabbi and a person who thinks about the serious issues?
Don't you have any easier questions than that?
I saved that for the last.
It's a real tough one, and I don't want to be glib in answering it. The first book I wrote was Jewish Reflections on Death, and I wrote that when I was 30. When you're 30, it's easy to pontificate about it because it's not going to happen to you. It's going to happen to somebody else. It's going to happen one of these days. Much harder for me to talk about it now. But I guess there are 2 things we have to say. And if they're opposites, they're opposites. One is that life is limited. Life is limited, which means you can't waste it. If I only got so many years to live, I can't spoil it or desecrate it or waste it on Narishkeit. I've got to use it for good purposes. I can't say I'll do it tomorrow. I don't know if I'll have tomorrow. Nobody has tomorrow for sure. And the past is for sure gone. I can't do anything about it. That's why it's called the present. So I don't know. First thing I say is use every minute wisely, purposefully, seriously, religiously, sacredly, because God knows whether we have tomorrow. And the second thing I have to say is the opposite, which is that the soul, Harold Kushner puts it very well, the soul does not disappear when the body does. The soul and the good we do and the good we leave behind remains. And if we've connected with people who care about us and value us and learn from us, that remains. And that lasts and that doesn't go to waste. Finish with one story that I think makes the point. 2 twins are in the embryo and they don't know what's going to happen. and they wonder. And one is a cynic. He says, this is the end, I guarantee you. This is the finish. The other one says, how do you know? You've never been out there. Who knows what it'll be when you get out there? And one gets out there. And the second one is left by himself. And he says, see, I knew there's nothing out there. You go and you disappear. And the one that goes out there begins to live a meaningful life. Just as we don't know how come there's life before birth, we don't know much about life after death. But I hope that not only within God's memory, but in the memory of those whom we've taught, something lasts. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Rabbi Spitz, would you like to wrap it up?
Yes, I again just want to express my gratitude to you, my beloved friend, Jack, for sharing with all of us this time in your presence. I have the privilege, now I'm saying to the larger group, to speak with you once or twice a week for many, many weeks as we work together on our book. And what I continue to remember is your enthusiasm. You continue to surprise me every time we speak with something you've just learned, and to do it with a sense of discovery. And no doubt that is part of the secret to your longevity, is your curiosity and the joy you take in new ideas. We have the privilege in this time that we just spent with you of a harvest of many people that we have read about, like Rabbi Kushner and Rabbi Heschel, that were your close friends. You, for me, Jack, are a privilege to have as a friend and as a teacher. You continue to give me hope for the Jewish people and hope for my own longevity of purpose. So I say thank you, both for this hour and a quarter that we've been together, but for all the times that we've shared.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Riemer, Rabbi Spitz, for this hour. Lots to think about and lots to appreciate. I hope you all have a great Sunday. Lots of time to go out there and do good things and call people. So take care. See you lots coming up the next week or so with CSP. And looking forward. Rabbi Spitz, when is this book coming out? Do you know?
It's in before High Holidays.
Okay.
Ben Yehuda Press, duets
Nice.
on Psalms, drawing meaning from ancient words.
Looking forward to, I will share that information with everybody, how to get the new book, and maybe we'll do a program about the book. Take care, everybody. If you're new to CSP, nice to meet you. Go to occsp.net and join our email list. If you're like the Phillipses who have been with CSP now for quite a bit, thank you for being with CSP. Or Tamar, nice to see you. And Rita Rubin, Rosalie, everybody. I'm going to take care of my children and then drive up to see Codex Sassoon today up in Los Angeles. Take care, everybody. Have a great Sunday. Bye-bye.
Bye.